Good afternoon, and welcome to day 2 of the Sexuality, Integrity, and the University National Conference. If you're joining us today, my name is Aline Oliver, and I'm the Executive Director of the Love and Fidelity Network. It is my honor to be with you and to be your moderator for today. This year's conference has been made possible by numerous supporters, including the following: the Wheatley Institution at Brigham Young University, the Pontifical John Paul II Institute at the Catholic University of America, the Christian Union at America's leading schools from the Ivy League to the West Coast, the Heritage Foundation, advancing American values, free enterprise, limited government, and individual freedom, and the Leadership Institute, helping young conservatives maintain strong voices on college campuses. We are grateful for their support and making this virtual event possible to as many young adults and college students throughout the nation. Before we begin, we'd like to provide you with a special message from one of our sponsors, the Christian Union. To learn more, visit christianunion.org. First, I'd like to thank all the students attending this conference. Please know that the Love and Fidelity Network is honored and impressed by your leadership, by your commitment to bring your example to your peers and to your campus. I'd also like to thank the Love and Fidelity's generous supporters, you individuals who are committed to our mission. You help us form student groups on campus, provide us the opportunity to offer reading groups to any campus, and to help all of us expand our intellectual horizons. Before we begin our first presentation of day 2, I'd like to thank the Heritage Foundation. Do you dream of an internship in Washington, D.C.? The Heritage Foundation Young Leaders Program offers students an unparalleled opportunity to explore everything from healthcare, education, energy, national security, foreign policy, and legal policy, to marketing, development, external outreach, graphic design, and more. Students will become acquainted with America's leading policy experts, enhance their research, writing, and career development skills, network with leading conservative thinkers, and visit major sites of American heritage, such as the Capitol, the National Archives, the White House, and Mount Vernon. To apply for one of their internships, visit heritage.org/internships. heritage.org/internships. Our next guest is Dr. Donald Hilton. Dr. Donald Hilton is a neurosurgeon in San Antonio, Texas. He has served as the Adjunct Associate Professor of Neurosurgery at the University of Texas Medical School at San Antonio, where he has directed the Spine Fellowship. He has authored peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters on addiction, including a chapter on the neuroscience of sexual including the Neuroscience of Sexual Addiction in the academic psychiatry textbook, Neurobiology of Addiction by Oxford University Press. He has also served on the board of directors of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation and has served on the boards of the Society for Advancement of Sexual Health. Dr. Hilton has spoken at numerous symposiums and forums on pornography as a public health issue in the United States and even internationally. This includes a congressional hearing in the US Capitol building, a symposium in the Polish Parliament building, and the Vatican Conference in 2017. He has also been featured in several documentaries on the harms of pornography. He and his wife, Jana, and their 5 children and 11 grandchildren live in Texas. Donald, welcome to the National Conference.
Thank you so much, Align, and what a privilege and a pleasure it is to be with you all today. COVID has redefined our world in many ways, and it's not all bad. Interestingly, I was reflecting on how usually this talk might be given in front of an audience and the presenters behind a podium or on a stand, speaking to a large group. And for me at least, these presentations have become in a way more personal. If you think about it, you're all at a computer somewhere watching this, and we're almost really one-on-one having a conversation together about this. And so in some ways, it's much more intimate. It's something that I don't think we would have come to without this worldwide experience that we've had. If you've read the abstract about this presentation, I'm going to try to follow that fairly well. We'll try to flow through some of the ideas in the abstract. I actually have it here to kind of prompt me. Notice that in the first part of the abstract, I speak about how pornography has gone mainstream. It's gone worldwide. It's the de facto sex education instrument for adolescents, even pre-adolescents, unfortunately, emerging adults, young people, and in a sense everyone in some way. And it's also, like gambling, has an addictive potential. Now, let me be clear. Even if a person says, well, I may use pornography, but I'm not addicted, whatever they think that means, in my opinion, it doesn't mean that it's not harmful and that it doesn't have harmful effects on their sexuality, on their relationship, on their relationships, on their emotions. I think it does. And if you're looking for someone that's more apologetic or tries to walk a middle line about the harms of pornography, you're probably not listening to the right person. I believe that it's harmful. I think it produces what I call a stifling sameness in sexuality. It writes sexual scripts for people that use it, and essentially they find that they try to mirror these activities that they learn from pornography. They learn not only cognitively, but unfortunately at a very limbic level, with their reward system being programmed to want to emulate what they've seen. And so we're going to talk about those things, and also then we'll talk a little bit about the industry that drives this harmful and addictive, exploitive, and predatory product. And also why I think a public health approach is necessary for us to effectively address this problem. So with that introduction, I love some of the 60s songs, and there's one, you've probably heard it, and even though at least your parents have, and Simon and Garfunkel, and in some ways what they sang in the early 60s is more true today. It's a song called The Sound of Silence. And some of those words for me are very haunting, particularly when I think about what's happening today with pornography. People talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, and no one dared disturb the sound of silence. And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made. In fact, sometimes the way I'm going to do this presentation today is more interactive, where we're going to actually try to look at each other and talk. And I usually use slides, probably too heavily normally. And if I use slides today, I would probably wait in more, and you'd be looking at slides more than us just talking. So what I am going to do though is hold up, like this, for instance, is I've used this on slides. You'll notice a photograph of people sitting together and not talking. They're looking at their cell phones, their devices. And then I have the caption from the song that I just read below that. And of course, social media, texting, but essentially it's a disconnecting thing. In some ways, of course, social media and the internet is wonderful, and it does connect us in many ways. It connects us today with marvelous technology. Unfortunately, if we depend too heavily on that, we can miss that human connection, the ability to actually connect with each other as human beings and to have that emotional connection. It's so important, not only for our interpersonal relationships, but for the world, for our communities, to actually have empathy and compassion for each other. Dr. John Brewery once said that in a toxic environment, toxic decisions seem rational. How true that is. What is porn today? The first issue of Playboy launched in the early 50s, I think 1953. And interestingly, Hugh Hefner produced that magazine. He had a centerfold of Marilyn Monroe, and so Hollywood kind of jumped on board early with pornography. And it was an analog. It was a picture. It was photographs. And it was considered revolutionary at the time. It certainly was. I don't believe in a good way. And yet now, where are we with pornography? Certainly analog pornography isn't doing very well. Now, of course, it's digital. It's very interactive. More and more, it's an interactive experience, not just someone viewing pornography. One website just a few years ago had over 90 billion downloads on one site alone, one of the largest sites in the world. The typical script is usually very male-centric. Now, what I'm going to do in talking about some of these things today, let's just set some ground rules so that you understand where I'm coming from. I will talk pretty frankly about pornography, but I will not use slang terms. I will use medical terms when I describe these acts, okay? We'll set that groundwork, and I'll talk about some peer-reviewed papers that discuss technically what's happening with pornography. And also, I won't show you or hold up any images that you would find offensive, okay? So just so you understand that groundwork, but we are going to speak frankly today, because I think if we don't, we're not even going to be able to put the wheels on the road and really discuss this. So the typical script, as I mentioned, is very male-centric, and now is not just watching pornography. It's not just looking at a picture. It's really, in my opinion now, with masturbation being paired with pornography so widely, an interactive digital sexual experience. It's a digital sexual intercourse experience. And particularly with 3D pornography now becoming more and more popular, with Oculus devices, with 3D technology, with teledildonics, there's actually masturbation devices that work in sync with filmed pornography, with several cameras being used to film. So that gets to be more of a digital sexual experience, more than just watching pornography. And I believe it's much more imprinting in terms of affecting the person's sexual templates, their sexual desires, and certainly their sexual perspectives. What is in pornography? I'm going to hold, also get your phones ready. If you don't mind, kind of have your phones, and I'm going to hold up some papers and some excerpts, and just get ready to take a photograph of it, and then you can go look these up, okay? So this is one, and I'm going to hold this right here to try to see if I can get this for you. Okay, right there. Okay, can you take a photograph of that? Get your camera, everyone. Click that. All right. Now, this is a paper published. It's by Anna Bridges, Robert Wotznitzer, Ara Schnarr, and Chen Sun. I know Chen Sun's at NYU. I'm not sure where the others are. And Rachel Lieberman. It's titled Aggression and Sexual Behavior in Best-Selling Pornographic Videos. And what they did is they took 250 of the, at the time, this was a few years ago, the top selling and renting videos, and they looked for aggression, verbal, physical aggression in these videos. Now, there's some controversy there. Some would say, well, they defined aggression too broadly. I mean, even a slap or a playful push was defined as aggression. And I'm not saying they did that, but that's the argument. When you see different papers, so you can critically evaluate them, talking about the content of pornography and whether they're describing aggressive behavior or not, then that's where the controversy will come in as well. What was their definition of aggression? And so you need to read the paper and see if you agree with their definition. I do. What they found was that up to 90%, 88.2% of the 304 scenes they analyzed contained physical aggression, principally spanking, gagging, and slapping, and about half the scenes were verbal aggression, name calling, with slang names. And perpetrators were almost overwhelmingly male. The targets were overwhelmingly female. The targets either showed pleasure to the aggression or they responded neutrally to the aggression. Now, this paper, and this is again by Chen Sun, who was one of the authors on the paper I just mentioned to you, Matthew Ezel and Olivia Kendall, and it was published in the journal Violence Against Women. Its title is Naked Aggression, the Meaning and Practice of Ejaculation on a Woman's Face. Now, I'm going to hold that one up. I want you to take a photograph of that one. Okay, let me get it. There you go. Okay, take a picture of that with your phone, and you can go look that one up. So what is this paper saying? Now, if you go back and read the first paper that I showed you, they looked at content, like what acts are being shown. And of course, vaginal intercourse, oral sex, and anal sex are shown in almost all pornography clips. But interestingly, when the male climaxes and ejaculates, rarely does the male ejaculate inside the body of the woman. And I'm talking about heterosexual pornography today, just for clarification. On over half the scenes, and I think it's even more than that, I could go back and look at the specifics, but it's overwhelmingly, they will withdraw and ejaculate on the woman's body. It's kind of, to me, with my biology perspective, more of a mammalian marking behavior. Frequently on the woman's face. Now, this article that you just took a picture of, Naked Aggression, the Meaning and Practice of Ejaculation on a Woman's Face, interestingly, these authors found that a lot of usually these are young adults, emerging adults, that want to actually do this. So they've been scripted that, well, you're not supposed to have normal sex where you actually, and I'm going to speak frankly, but again, no slang terms. I'm a physician, so I'm just going to speak directly here. No ejaculation inside the woman, but rather on her, and particularly on her face. So it's more of a marking behavior. And interestingly, in terms of decoding the meaning of what that meant, they found that they meant aggression. The males intended it to be a domination, aggression type marking behavior. And the recipient, the woman, took it that way as well. And in interviewing the subjects, these authors found that the women did not want it. And interestingly, even the young men that did this knew the women did not want it, and they still perpetuated it on them. There wasn't, in most cases, a strict don't do this. It wasn't rape, but it was more, they said later, well, I didn't like that and I didn't want it. My first question to proponents of pornography, and there's sexologists that say pornography is great, is this great? Since this is what most pornography is this great? And also my other question for them is, how is this sex positive? We talk about, well, if you like pornography, you're sex positive in that normal sexologist lingo. And so how is that sex positive for the woman, particularly? Even for the man, but particularly for the woman. Well, this is another paper I want you to take a photograph of. Let's see if I can get it right here. The reason I show this paper is it's similar to the other one that I just showed you, and this is about anal heterosex. And I'm not talking about anything but, in this paper, this is a British Medical Journal paper, and what it's talking about are younger women that really did not want to have anal sex. It was painful to them, and they didn't want it, but the young men perpetuated it on them because they, again, had been scripted in pornography that that's what you have to do. And yet the women who had watched the pornography had been scripted as well. Well, I guess that's what I have to do. I guess that's what sex is now. And the wording of this, in terms of how the authors finished it, their conclusion was young people's narratives normalized, listen to these words, coercive, painful, and unsafe anal heterosex. This study suggests an urgent need for harm reduction efforts targeting anal sex to help encourage discussion about mutuality and consent, reduce risky and painful techniques, and challenge views that normalize, listen to this word, coercion. So remember, this isn't just an unusual act in pornography. It happens in virtually every scene. If you go look at that Bridges paper earlier and many other content analysis papers recently, then you'll find that these are popular genres. On Pornhub and the large porn sites, these are popular. And anal sex is a very popular term. Now, I'm just going to read a couple of producers, male pornography producers, to kind of show their attitudes. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the public health aspects from the performer side. So Bill Margold was a pornography producer, performer, and it kind of goes with what I just talked about with that Chen Sun article about naked aggression and ejaculation in the face. And this is what he said. This is quoting from Gail Dines. And read Gail's work. She wrote a book, Pornland, How Porn Has Hijacked Sexuality, Our Sexuality. I would encourage, it's a hard-hitting book, but it's absolutely dynamite. It really, I think, it's the truth. And Gail's done a great work with that. So what Bill said was, quote, I'd really like to show what I believe the men want to see, violence against women. I firmly believe that we serve a purpose by showing that. The most violent we can get is ejaculation in the face. I edited that a little bit. Men get off on that because they get even with the women they can't have. We try to inundate the world with orgasms in the face, end quote. So this is kind of going with what this naked aggression paper published in Violence Against Women talked about, isn't it? And then there's this other producer named John Stagliano. And he said this, quote, I was the first to shoot Rocco. Together we evolved towards rougher stuff. He started to spit on girls. It's a strong male dominant thing with women being pushed to their limit. It looks like violence, but it's not. I mean, pleasure and pain are the same thing, right? End quote. Interestingly, there's a journal called Porn Studies, which is purportedly an academic look at pornography. And a lot of sexologists support the journal or on the board and quote from the journal. And there was a paper recently, I say recently, it was within 4 years ago, 2014, by a couple of people that wrote, and in that they talked about John Stagliano, the person I just read the statement from. And they called him in this Porn Studies journal an innovative porn entrepreneur. So they're basically saying that he was really pushed porn forward. And maybe he did, but again, I wouldn't agree with the direction. I think it was a negative direction. And I'd like to show you this. Take a picture of this. This is really one that I think you would find useful to go pull and read. Let me try to right there. Photograph that one. So this paper is called Pathways to Health Risk Exposure in Adult Film Performers, and it's by Corita Grusden et al. And her author. She is a emergency room physician. And what she did, and the other authors in this paper, was look at what happens to the performers. And these are mainly the females. They talk about what happens. And pull that paper and read it. It's very interesting in the sense that it's not anecdotal. It talks about different risks. And I'll read some of the conclusions. We don't have time to do the whole paper. Sometimes if I'm taking an hour, I'll go through and talk about all of them. Conclusions. In this study, we identified other serious health risks among adult female performers, including physical, mental, social risks, severe and life-threatening. Clearly, the current mechanisms within the adult film industry are not adequate to prevent risk to performers, especially young females who are not aware of the breadth or degree of health risks. The high turnover rate makes it difficult to ensure that they are adequately informed. So there's informed consent issues. So spend some time with those papers, and that will give you, I think, at least a flavor for what's happening with the content. Now I'm going to say a few words about addiction. You'll hear the other side, those that are more pro-pornography, say that it's not an addiction. I'm just going to say a few words about that. So it's a big industry, and industries fight the word addiction. Think about the tobacco industry. They didn't like the word addiction. They fought it tooth and nail, and some of them still do. And the pornography industry is the same. This is a Slate magazine article here. And take a picture of that one. It's called Vampire Porn. It's about MindGeek. MindGeek owns most of the pornography sites on the internet, and including Pornhub. And so this is big industry we're talking about. So what about addiction? They fight this. They fight this word. Look, even an addiction, we have no problem now in terms of the DSM-5 calling gambling an addiction, a natural addiction. So gambling is an addiction. In other words, online poker is an addiction, but not online porn, according to the DSM-5 now. And that's not consistent, if you think about it. Addiction, in my opinion, represents, I agree with Cower and Malinka. They wrote a paper out of Stanford University years ago in Nature Neuroscience, and they described addiction as a pathological yet powerful form of learning and memory. It turns out that in the past we thought the brain was not changeable, particularly as we became adults. We know now that even violin playing changes our brain. It physically changes it. And any kind of learning changes the brain. And this is fascinating in the sense that addiction does too. It's a form of learning. I agree with, again, Cower and Malinka on that. So there are typical changes that we see in the brain with addiction. It changes the brain physically. And several studies have now been done with pornography. And I use the word addiction in terms of, is there pornography addiction listed in any body yet? No, but there is compulsive sexual behaviors listed as an impulse control disorder in the ICD-11, which came out within the last year. So yes, it's an abnormality, finally. And that diagnosis entered the ICD-11 with tremendous criticism from the pornography industry and people who see sex from their view. I want to show you one other paper that I want you to, and I'm, again, in the interest of time, we could spend an hour on this, but please take a picture of this paper, A Current Understanding of the Behavioral Neuroscience of Compulsive Sexual Behavior Disorder and Problematic Pornography Use. Published in Current Behavioral Neuroscience Reports. It's recent. Four of the authors, Stark, Kluken, Brandt, and Strahler, are in Germany, and Mark Potenza is at Yale. And it's a great article to talk about the physical, neurochemical changes that happen with pornography that basically sync with similar changes in substance addictions and gambling. And so these authors really kind of support, they say there's certainly evidence to support um, an addictive label. And this article also I would go pull to Lancet Psychiatry, is excessive sexual behavior and addiction an addictive disorder. Okay, you can take a picture of that one, and that's again Potenza, Gola, Valerie Voonkoor, and Krauss. So go look at those. And as I told you, compulsive sexual behavior is now classified as a mental health disorder in the ICD-11 for the first time. Spend some time with those. I want to talk through one other learning. People say, well, can pornography really change the way you view sexuality? Okay, so let me tell you, there was a little story about some rats. It was a study done a number of years ago. Rats don't like cadaverine. Cadaverine is the substance that causes dead things to smell really bad. Okay, and if you take concentrated cadaverine, it smells so bad that even rats don't like it as much as they like to eat things that don't smell good. They hate cadaverine. And so what these researchers did, fascinating study on sexuality, they took cadaverine and they soaked a piece of wood with the cadaverine, and then they put the piece of wood in a box with a male rat. So the male rat immediately senses the cadaverine and runs away from the wood to the other side of the box. Wants to have nothing to do with this horrible smell. Next part of the experiment is they took a female rat and put her in the cage, and a sexually receptive female, and the male rat mated with the female. So there's nothing wrong with the male sexual drive, as would be predicted. Then the next part of the experiment was they took a female rat and soaked her in cadaverine. And then they put her back in with the male. And at first he ran away because this smell was repugnant even for a rat. But his sexual drive overcame that, and he ended up learning that his sexual drive was stronger than his repulsion for cadaverine, and he mated with the cadaverine-soaked female. And the last part of the experiment's where it really gets interesting, because then they threw the same piece of wood, cadaverine-soaked wood, back in the cage with this now conditioned male rat. And guess what he did? Instead of running from the piece of wood, he started chewing on it. And I think that's what's happening. I think pornography is creating this stifling sameness in our sexuality. And it's not a nice sameness. It's taking away our individuality. As Nicholas Tinbergen said, it's a supernormal stimulus. It's something that we value even over normal behavior. There was one woman, and there's another book. Let me see. I'm going to hold this up because I think this is a book that I'm going to hold on the bottom. I hope you can see the reference. I'll hold it close. Melissa Tankard. It's called Big Porn, Exposing the Harms of the Global Pornography Industry. And this woman said this about what had happened to her spouse. Quote, "He seemed to have gone to a different place to comment about the women in porn and me in a cold and detached way, to say things about women's bodies, sexual acts which came out of his mouth with swinging bluntness. A layer of empathy had been ground away. My man, the one that I had promised to love and cherish." I think that, let's say that you know someone that is struggling with pornography, or perhaps you are, and it's like, I really don't want to do this. I really want to reclaim my sexuality. I want to be able to have a relationship. There's so much out there. There's sites that you can go on to just get help. There's NoFap is a site. A good friend of mine, Alex Rhodes, runs it. There's many others that help folks. And there's, of course, Fight the New Drug has a great program as well. And then, of course, there's great therapists, particularly CSAT-trained therapists, but others that believe that compulsive sexuality exists as a disorder. And so seek that help. William Shakespeare said, "Refrain tonight, and that shall lend a hand of easiness to the next abstinence, the next more easy, for use almost can change the stamp of nature." One more picture in closing here. You see this man reaching down and the woman in the water, and he's on a rope. A few years ago, I was at the National Press Club in Washington. I'm on the board of NCOSI, and we were there for a press conference. And as we were walking out, this photograph was on the wall of this man reaching down. He was hanging from a chain, reaching down to the water. Turns out this woman's and her husband had gone over this waterfall in their boat, and he had drowned, unfortunately, tragically. She was twirling in the water and was about to drown, and he there was a crowd on the side watching this horrible situation, and no one could do anything. And this man wasn't a rescue worker. He actually was a construction worker, but he got the idea of having them lower his chain, their crane. They had a large construction crane. And so they lowered him down all the way to the water, and he reached down and he plucked her out of that water and saved her. You know, that's how I see us humans. I see it more as a cooperative thing. I see empathy and compassion. I see us helping each other and not using each other. I'm an optimist, actually. Despite the information I've given you, I believe that our brain was designed not just to want, but to love. I really believe that. And I think in the end that's where we'll be. I think love will win, and fidelity, as you're so appropriately named. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hilton. Really appreciate your presentation and making the points that you brought forth. If you haven't had a chance yet to drop us a question, you can. On Facebook, the comment section is right below the video. And on YouTube, on the desk app, drop the comment just below the chat box, which is on the right side of the stream. While you're there, because we live in this new world, if you'd like to go ahead, give us a like or a thumbs up, we would appreciate that digital acknowledgement. Dr. Hilton, you talked a lot, more about the addiction, the neurology behind the addiction. So I'm coming here with a question kind of out of the left field, more on the psychology aspect of it. But how do you repair trust in a relationship where there's been a discovery of porn usage? So can I turn you into a psychologist for a little bit?
Absolutely, with the disclaimer that I'm not actually a psychologist, okay? But I'll take a shot at it with that understanding.
I cannot see any questions.
Trust is such a powerful thing when it's there, and so noticeable when it's not, if you think about it. And when lost, it's not easily regained, particularly if the trust has been egregiously abused. And honestly, I think particularly if there is a long-term relationship, a marriage or a fiance, or just someone that they really love each other, they've developed what one party thought was trust and then finds out that it wasn't, it was a facade, then it's probably going to, for that relationship to survive, is probably going to take an outside bridge in the form of a therapist that's perhaps even for both parties, and then a facilitated disclosure where there is a discussion of what's happened with therapists facilitating that discussion. And sometimes the relationship won't survive. Sometimes there may be a bridge that can then be strengthened, where there can be a reemergence of another relationship out of that. But it's gonna take some help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hilton. Last question here, if I may. Some sexologists find it difficult to see harms in pornography. That's their position, I understand. How do we make others realize the magnitude of this issue? Is it how we frame it? Should we talk about live streaming pornography versus photostatic pornography? How can we help people understand the consequences and the impact of their decisions?
Education. There's there's wonderful organizations. Fight the New Drug, I think, has done a fantastic job, particularly for, again, young adults and emerging adults. I love the work that they've done. Um, Culture Reframe, Gail Dine's organization, and there's so many others. Um, but it's really education, and there's so much to read. By the way, um, my email for anyone that would like to contact me directly, I'd love to interact and share with you some even more references if you'd like. It's like my name, D. Hilton, Jr. I'm a junior, at sbcglobal.net. S is in Sam, B is in boy, C is in Cal, sbcglobal.net. But feel free to email me, and there's a lot of resources, people I know. I have wonderful individuals and organizations that I've come to know over the years. And I'd certainly love to interact on that if you'd like to do that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Donald Hilton. Really appreciate you for your presentation, for taking the time for questions, and for opening yourself up to maybe a couple hundred more questions from our friends in the audience there. So thank you so much. Shortly, we
It's
will
my
begin the
pleasure.
next presentation. Oh, thank you so much. We'll begin the next presentation in a couple of minutes. We'll be right back.